So today we're going to talk a little bit more around the construction industry, and we're going to look at it from a contractor's perspective. Today I'm joined by Mike Smith, who's a seasoned construction professional. So Mike, could you just quickly give an introduction?
Yes, my name's Mike Smith. I've known Jamie for several years now, always get on very well. I've been running a business for a very long time on the contractor side, a lot of experience. It's an SME. I'm very passionate about the construction industry. I fell into it literally, and I'm passionate about CIB and what it stands for, and also about doing the right thing in construction and trying to make construction easy.
Good. Well, thank you for that, Mike. I think what we'll do, we'll have a bit of fun. So to get a contractor's perspective, I'm going to ask some challenging questions. And what we'll do is we'll work through a typical construction process, but we'll start with procurement, if I may. So typically on construction projects, I say typically, if using single stage tendering, the contractor's generally involved at REBA stage 5, which is construction, obviously tendering at REBA stage 4, if you like. How is that from a contractor's perspective? And is that too late or too early? Or
My experience, and particularly lately, is that the majority of tenders that we come across our desk that we're tendering on are generally over budget. And I think that is because the professional side of the industry, which is the PQSs, base their values on what they know a building should cost, but that's historic information. And where they lack clarity is actually what's happening in the market. They say they know what's happening in the market, but the reality is they don't. So to give an example, we've just priced a job and we had a post-tender questionnaire come back, and there were a dozen items that said, could you review the cost of this item because it's overstated? And my response to every one of those was, we've been to market, these are market costs, market values, the price stands as it is. So there seems to be a lack of reality when it comes to budget costing for a building. And I think that contractors, and this is an old form of contracting, Bovis were very pro this with Marks and Spencer's. Bovis did every Marks and Spencer's job under management contracting, if I remember rightly, because Bovis were there and there was Marks and Spencer's were saying, I need a new store, a new fit out, etc. And Bovis would manage the whole project from start to finish. And that was very early contractor involvement because they were bought in at REBA stage 3 and 4. So REBA stage 3 is when the design's finished and they're starting to produce the working drawings. Contractors now don't get involved until stages 4 and 5, 4 being costing, which is both your side, the professional side, and ours. And invariably, the expectations of the client are set by the PQSs, the architects, etc., with no contractor involvement. And that's a lost position there and a lost skill, because contractors aren't there necessarily to, the perception is contractors are just there to rip the client off, make as much money as possible and go on to the next job. We're not all like that. And the culture change in this industry has to be getting good contractors involved at an early stage so the client has certainty of cost and they can decide whether to proceed. You've done videos on funding and costing, whether that funding is right for that project. And we often hear this term value engineering. Value engineering to me is too late. It shouldn't be done post-tender. Value engineering should be done before tender, because post-tender it's too late. It means you've asked for more than you can afford. So it's always the Rolls-Royce aspirations with a mini budget, and that's to me a skill that's lost. And also, as contractors, I'm not saying we know better than the engineers and the architects, but because of our experience, we can offer a lot of input into how buildings are designed. not just for what they look like, which is always a priority, but it was drummed into me at college. I did a course on maintenance about cost in use. And clients need to know what their buildings are going to cost in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, cyclical maintenance. And that comes under NRM level 3, which is the post-cost use, as you know. So there's lots of things that a contractor can bring to the party, and getting them involved at an early stage, to me, is important.
So you mentioned Bovis, I think it was Bovis Lend-Lease, wasn't
Yes,
it? And that
well,
was a management contract. And
Yeah.
in the UK, it's not that widely used, the
No.
same as construction management. So whether that's a real opportunity, I mean, it's an opportunity, but whether that's actually going to stick or be taken on. But I think what we're talking about is early contractor engagement. So what the solution there is, in what people are comfortable with, is normally like a design and build or a standard or an intermediate form, is two-stage tendering.
Yeah.
So under two-stage tendering, the contractors brought in early. What would you say is the most optimum, in terms of REBA stages, a contractor's brought into the process, and why?
They need to be brought in certainly at level 3, at the design, the real nitty-gritty design stage, where the architect can say, I want this curved building, I want a super duper M&E system installed. And invariably what happens is it goes out to tender, and the contractors, all the prices come back, and the successful contractor says, well, it's going to cost this because that's what it costs. That's not what the client's expecting, and that's not what really needs to be designed. And I go back to this point about VE. VE shouldn't happen. VE should never happen, because if you've designed it right at the start and you've costed it right, then you won't have a VE exercise. You'll know exactly what you're getting for your buck. And so early involvement with contractors, you could go back to concept, which is REBA 1, and say, get them involved in REBA 1, or have discussions. I think the big issue there, though, is, and we can chat about this for hours, is the value of the PQS and the contractor's QS. And there is another discussion about who sits where, because there's this concept of the PQS being the person who knows everything and how it all works, and the contractor's QS who's there to try and get as much money as he possibly can. And it comes down to me to one word. It's about cross-pollination and about cooperation and integration. JCT, I think we've sort of touched on that on other conversations. JCT has a great clause about collaborative work. It's in minor works, it's in the intermediate form, it's in the full form. Collaboration, to me, starts early on. It doesn't start just when you sign the contract.
And you bring me on to a great point, because so what I was going to say then, so two-stage tendering, contractors brought on early, usually from after the stage 1 tender, working presumably under a PCSA, so a pre-construction service agreement. And there's obviously that creates an opportunity for collaboration, cooperation, working together to build up, obviously, a good product, good quality service, whatever it might be. So why does that not always happen? So why does the client still act as a client and the contractor still act as a contractor? And why does that collaboration not necessarily happen, even though it's been facilitated?
Because it's trust and respect. If you go back to Victorian era, you look at people like Thomas Cubitt. Thomas Cubitt was a builder and designer. So he was the architect, he was the builder. He built most of Pimlico, he built the front of Buckingham Palace. The contractor was everybody and everything, and you only had this segregation. I mean, the CIB goes back to 1830 something from memory. RICS was later. REBA was about the same sort of time. So it's down to the client understanding where the contractor can actually fit in and actually save them money. And I say save the money, no one likes to spend more than they have to. is it saving money for the sake of getting what they want, but at a lesser cost, or is it a case of getting what they want for their optimum buck? So you can have gold-plated taps. Do you need gold-plated taps? Is that really what you really want? Could you not achieve your aesthetics by taking a lesser product, but still looking at that product and saying, is it a lesser product because it's cheaper, because it's not made so well? And that also applies to buildings. Or has the performance specification that we want it to achieve been put in place? And that's where a contractor comes in, particularly if you look at maintenance contractors, facilities managers, etc. Got masses of experience about how buildings work in use, and that's missing. We never look at facilities management until the building's up and the chap comes in to look after the cleaners, the AC, the boilers and the electrical light bulbs and all sorts of stuff. We forget about that. So I think a lot of this comes down to cost, and it also comes down to the fact that the industry isn't working together. It says it is, but it isn't. We've still got REBA, we've got RICS, we've got CIOB, we've got FMB, we've got all those organisations. They're not joined up. They're not joined up. They're not thinking together. They're not acting as unity. And what other industry has so many associations? You take chemical industry, aircraft industry. We're not regulated, and that's part of the issue. But I think the clients would do well to actually say to the professional team, okay, we want this building, or we want this refurb, refit, whatever. How can I achieve what I want using best practice that's going to give me value for money? I don't say cheapest, because I think cheapest is where we're at. It's all about being cheap. And what we really should be saying is best value. And that's where the contractor coming in and being involved early, whether it's two-stage or whatever, because two-stage normally starts with prelims. What's it going to cost me? But again, if I think about prelims, if you've got a level platform with prelims, and I've always said that health and safety always gets devolved to the contractor, but it is the client's ultimate responsibility, because everybody's involved in health and safety. So if you said to the contractor, you've got to have toilets, you've got to have mesh rooms, you've got to have this, all those things that they say in the prelim documents, and this is what it's going to cost you, you've got a level playing field, because contractors will try, the nature of competitive tendering is they will try and achieve the requirements at minimum cost, because that's profit for them. So if you had that level playing field, you would then get to starting the involvement of the contractor, because there's trust.
You make some really good points there, but just thinking about that process. So, I mean, there's some really great points in there, some really good insights. But if we think about going through that pre-construction service agreement, in some of my experiences, no matter what solutions you create, so whether you're prime cost contracting, cost plus, you're looking at lots of different ways for engagement and collaboration to get to the right end result for both parties. When I say both parties, employer, contractor.
Yeah.
But there's sort of two questions here. Do you think all contractors understand they actually work for the employer, number one, so therefore they should be working in their interest? And number two, I used to say, and sometimes a contractor will always just be a contractor. And what I mean by that is they don't understand that, and they're still working in their own commercial advantage, irrespective of how you facilitated the process. I mean, what's your views on that?
So you've hit on commercial advantage. Great point. We're all in business to make money. It's as simple as that. What other industry works on the slim margins contracting does? And you look at the big boys who aren't, in terms of percentage of numbers, as big as we think they are. I mean, SMEs are about 75+% of the industry. So you talk about commercialism and contracting. Are contractors just there to use a term, screw the clients? I think some of them out there are. I genuinely do. And those are the rogue builders at the smaller end. And I have to say, some contractors, I know of contractors who I nearly worked for, whose first job when the tender was won was send it to the claims department. And that's what they did. And I think you and I have discussed that at some point in our checkered past. But that's wrong. But then on the other side of that is a contractor, when they get a job, will always say, where have I cocked up? What have I not priced properly? And really, another area of mistrust that comes in is that when we, as a contractor, get a post-tender questionnaire, the PQS will always point out what we've priced high in their opinion, but they never come back and say what you priced low. And that creates mistrust, certainly from our side, and we've been around for getting on for 40 years now. That creates mistrust. I try not to let that get into, cloud my judgment. But yes, you're absolutely right. The client, the person paying the bill at the end of the day, does command respect. But because we as contractors are kept away for so long before till we get on site sometimes, so we actually meet that end client, there's always a skepticism. There's always, it's a male chauvinistic domineering, a bit of bullying, a bit of playground politics going on. So yeah, get to know your clients. I'll give an example of, we've got one client in particular. It's our single biggest client, and quite dangerous for us as a business. But they phone us up and they ask us for budgets. They phone us up and say, do you think this is the right rate for this job? And we give our advice. If they phone up and say, oh, what's the building cost? And say, is it £2,000 a square metre? And we say, no, it's not. It's £2,500. Oh, well, how have you got that? Well, if you look at historic jobs that we've just finished, that's the square meterage footage. That's what it's cost. What you're proposing, the building you're proposing, isn't like that. And this is where, again, budgeting for clients isn't an exact science and is possibly slightly wrong, because everyone looks at cost per square metre based on building cost information service data. They look at that, but BCIS is an average. It doesn't look at specifics, and that's where costings go horribly wrong, because a square building or a rectangular building is going to be one rate. A hexagonal building or a round building is going to be another rate. If it's got 10 stories, it's going to be another rate. I'll give you a very good example of where things can go wrong, and also, client not being respected. One of my early career jobs was a contractor surveyor for a small builder. And we worked for a company, regularly worked for this company, they bought land or houses, knocked them down, built them. So I joined this company, first job, there you go, Mike, do your takeoff, get your sub quotes out. So I did all of that. And I remember the brickwork coming back at a horrendously overstated amount. And I went to my boss and I said to him, Rob, this building, I can't get the brickwork done for your estimate. How did you work that estimate out? And he said, oh, well, that job over there? And I said, yes. He said, well, all I did was take that as a square footage and I multiplied it, and that's what I came up with. I said, but it's a completely different building. Different foundations, different structure. The regs have changed slightly on thermal heat loss, etc. You're wrong. That company went bust a year after I left. I was there 9 months. So there's an example of a contractor getting it totally wrong and the costing's wrong, but also the client, there was just no respect there, because if you like, you say us as contractors respecting the client, it was also the subcontractor coming back to us because we're their client ultimately. And it's where this industry is going wrong. There's this mistrust, and there has to be built trust in order for everything to happen. But yes, you said, I'm going to come back to this client respect. I think it's massively important. You need to know who the end user is. You need to want to work for them again. Be they a one-off client, which they could be, but one-off clients come back. We experience that as a business. If they're a big client, they're going to have a lot of projects. You want to keep them going. You want to keep that, because that's easy marketing. We've been discussing marketing before this, but that's easy. Your reputation, you're only as good as your last job, and all that stuff applies. But if you can get in with get your clients' respect, your clients' trust, it's easy. Life's easy, and that's what I said, making life easy.
Yeah, again, some really great points there. I mean, let's just try to wrap up the two-stage tendering. So you mentioned around obviously prelims and obviously from a commerciality, the contractors in it to make a profit. Of course, every business should be making a profit.
Absolutely.
And that's what the two-stage tendering tries to address, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So we look at the first stage where we look at the prelims, so how long do we believe this project's going to take? What resources do you need? And obviously non-specific prime costs. So you deal with the prelims. We generally would fix the overhead and profit rate. So at that stage, at least we know what that is. So there's no sort of, you're not making a profit. So that's dealt with. And then the other thing in terms of contractor pricing and risk, the idea is that during that design development stage, there's an opportunity then to market test during the PCSA. So sort of two-stage tender does try to address a lot of those items. That moves us on, going back to, I want to move to tender now, but that goes back to the single stage tendering.
But can I just stop you there and just point out, and I'm not trying to do a sales pitch for JCT, but there is the JCT Constructing Excellence form of contract, and that's known as pay and gain. I've not worked under it, but I've read it. And going back to my college days, there was a form of contract that worked on that basis. That Constructing Excellence form of contract is fantastic, because you share the pain, you share the gain. And that gets rid of all of the current stuff we're seeing, and gets that involvement between the client and the client's team. I'm going to use that word rather than saying them and us, because it is supposed to be a team. It gets rid of it. It devolves it, because you're almost having target costs you've got to achieve. And if you save the client money, if I understand this right, and I've got to remember what I read. So let's take windows. Say you've got a budget of 20 grand for windows, and you get them as a contractor for £15,000. So you got a £5,000. I know we're talking small money in the scheme of things. So you got £5,000 there saving. What happens under that form of contract, if I understood it rightly, is that you as a contractor share, so you get a little bit extra on your 15 grand. So does the client. That to me is a win-win. That is a definite win-win. Yes, and it shows trust and open book accounting that it can work. But that contract's very rarely used. And if you talked about two-stage tendering. Two-stage tendering, from what I've seen, tends to generally be quite hypothetical. So you get an outline drawing. You don't get a full set of construction drawings, so you haven't really got a good idea. You get an outline of what the client's team thinks should be in the job, and that is the preliminary cost, the PC sums, etc. And that's what you base your price on. When it actually comes to the full construction drawings, that could be totally different. But you have had early contractor engagement, and if you get them on knowing what their margin's going to be, got half a chance of getting it right and working collaboratively.
So there's a couple of interesting points there, even though we went off at a tangent. I'm going to continue taking us off at this tangent. So there's a couple of things there. So you're talking, let's forget the form of procurement. You're talking about pay and gain mechanisms.
Yeah.
So it's easy to talk about sharing the gain, but what when the contractor's got to share the pain? And we talk about a contractor being a contractor and the commerciality is how are those costs presented as they should be. We talk about theoretically, and then so I'm going somewhere with this. And then also you mentioned around you use construction excellence, but years ago I worked on the JCT project partnering contracts, a PPC 2000 if I recall.
Yeah.
But how does introducing a contract make people work collaboratively? That's just a contract. Surely people have got to come to the party. So even that's theoretical, isn't it?
It is. You're absolutely right, and the key word there is contract. There has to be a contract because it's offer and acceptance. Unfortunately, whichever way you look at it, back in 1933, I think it was, we had this animal called the JCT, the Joint Contracts Tribunal, set up to try and get a commonality of a level playing field for all building contracts, because otherwise you could be in a situation where every contract was different, every job you did was different. So we got that commonality. We've got JCT, we've got NEC, we got the REBA form, which is actually, I've worked under the REBA form, love it to bits. It's a great contract. But to go back to where you were going with this about the contract, about collaboration, it's unfortunate that that's what's evolved. And it's going to take a monumental culture shift, which is the cultural shift is part of CIOB's corporate plan, which is about to be renewed. It's part of that cultural shift and the collaboration element. And we're going to have a contract. We're always going to have a contract because the legal boys will want it. And also you need a mechanism that should something go wrong, to sort of start the form of a dispute. I hate that word, but it's there. Start negotiations, but you need a document to give you your grounds for, you've done me wrong, you've got to pay or put right or do whatever that contract says. So you need that contract. In terms of why does the contract make us collaborative? Because it's written into it. Should we be collaborative already? The answer to that is yes, we should be. We should be working as a team. And I think one of the major contractors, and in fact you go back to Sir John Egan and Michael Latham, they're all about constructing the team, as I recall, and making sure it's fair. So Egan built Terminal 5, where back in the day, and I forget when it was, but it's some time ago, we had electricians and carpenters on decent money. What they didn't tell you was that they had to be on site at 5:30, 6 o'clock every morning, because every morning they had to do an induction. They had to park a certain way from the site. They were brought into the site. They did a full day's work, which was monitored, and they got paid well for it. That was real collaboration. That was the client leading. So BAA led the whole process. That worked really well, in my opinion. Yes, the building cost a bit more, but everybody got paid properly. And I think that's part of the issue of mistrust, is that everyone's trying to get one over, make a bit more money.
So I think what you're saying, very unsurprisingly, is collaboration and a good culture is led from the top, i.e. a decent client. Shouldn't be a surprise, but it obviously does come as a surprise.
But who's the client led by? The client's led by their professional team, architects, QSs, engineers, etc., aren't they? They're led by them. So already you've got that sort of two sides. But as you've rightly said, if the client leads it all, and the client will need to have a team around them in order to lead it all, that has that specialist knowledge, which is where people like you come in, yeah, it'll work every day of the week. And Michael Latham wrote it, and he wrote it with a fountain pen. He didn't type it. And then Sir John Egan, I think it was about 10 years later, came along with his bit. We've forgotten about it. We've left it. Then we invented constructing excellence. We keep reinventing the wheel. We need to stop where we're at right now. Just stop, take stock, and we've got it with the building safety regulator now in, and Dame Judith's work. Let's stop. Let's start again. I've been saying for some time, JCT needs to be rewritten and totally written in that we have to collaborate. and getting, as we keep saying in this session about early contractor involvement, get a team together, a proper team, because you don't play rugby if you're not a team. It doesn't work.
So all of that's really good stuff, Mike. So, but there's still the reality. A big part of construction is single stage tendering, competitive tendering, which, as we've sort of alluded to previously, means receiving some information around a project. I use the word cold, but there's been no involvement prior to receiving specifications, drawings, and gaining a real understanding. I mean, what are the issues from a contractor's point of view of single stage tendering, not really knowing a project? And the timescales involved.
The first thing we look at, and I have to do it. So any tender that comes into our office, the first thing we look at is the tender period, the return date. We then look at the complexity of the project. We then look at, does it fit with what we do, with our skill sets? So we're starting the risk analysis process. In our business, we tend to start using a RAG scale, so red, amber, green. Pretty standard stuff in the industry, but so that's what we look at. We then make that final decision: do we want to tender it? Because we're very good at saying, everyone's very good in construction about saying yes, I'll take it on. Going back to your early contractor involvement and client involvement, if you look at that, the client should be selecting the right contractor for the job. That's paramount. It's all too easy to have the team saying, "I've worked with this contractor, worked with that contractor, they're really good," etc. Grenfell's a classic case. We had an architect who'd never done a high-rise residential building doing a cladding job. So that's back over to you, but back on me. Tender comes in, go through the process. We decide whether we want to tender or not. Should have done that before in reality. And then we start looking at the program. And I could ask you a good question about program. How do the consultant team come up with their program? Because we look at programs sometimes and we just say they're totally unrealistic. What's your guide for that program?
It's a really good question. I mean, can you just clarify the question? Are we talking I presume we're talking the construction program.
Yeah.
So you receive the tender and someone just generically says it's 52 weeks or it's 18 months or what have you. I mean, I would have to obviously answer from our point of view. I mean, you know me personally and the way we operate as a business. We're also a construction management business.
Yeah.
So I think it's a bit different from us because we have experience of programming construction works. But you've also got to think some of that's not even in your remit if you're maybe just a project management firm in terms of forecasting construction. So the way we would do it is we would actually work. We would know historically from projects, and you do know even before you even start to plan out on the Gantt chart or other how long something would take. So you have a good idea even as an estimate by volume of works, even value of work sometimes. But we would schedule it. I've got to talk away from our organisation to answer that. Having worked in different capacity where maybe we're just the QS on a project. Is sometimes dare I suggest it might be wet the finger and put it in the air. Should I suggest that? Doesn't sound very professional, but I've got to talk realistically about experiences. You talked about the BCIS earlier. You can use the BCIS as data. I personally wouldn't. I'm not in any way suggesting the BCIS data is not good data to use. I'm not suggesting that at all. It's not something I personally would do or we would do as an organisation. So I think there's a mix of how people come up with the construction period. And we've also got to think in terms, well, not think, but also respect the fact that might not be someone's remit.
Right.
To do so. So they would expect the contractor to come up with that. So sometimes, although it says 52 weeks, it's to be confirmed in tender. And then there is the last point we cannot ignore is no matter how long it's taken to get to the point of construction, there's a fixed date at the end. So it might just be we've taken a really long time, but you've got to get it done by them. And I think all of those answers there are the reality. There's no one answer, but
Understood.
yeah.
Okay. So going back to me, so really on the tendering side, it's trying to reduce your risks. So when we look at a tender, we're trying to look at the risks, be they logistics. So if you're doing a school, you know, you've got drop-off times, you've got term times, you've got exam times, you've got school activity times going on. We analyse all the risks, we look at the risks, and those risks are normally built into the prelims unless they're a construction risk. So the risk side of it, so how much management we need on a job at tender stage, is massively important to determining your prelim costs. And that's where, going back to your two-stage tendering and early contractor involvement, that could keep costs down if you've got a contractor in. Because a lot of the time we get a suggested say route into site and site setup, and when we get to site, I always do a pre-submission visit. Every tender that I submit has a pre-submission visit. We might see a different way of doing it. Might be easier. I say easier in terms of cost effectiveness. So the route's less. If we put the client at a little bit of disadvantage, might have to walk a bit further, park somewhere else. That's a benefit to the client and a benefit of the tender. And I guess the real question for us is we start looking at the subs we'll need, because unfortunately we live in a world where we can't employ everybody. We have massive workforces, and those days have unfortunately have long gone, where we had big workforces, regular workforces, and apprentices. Although we do as a business train, we're very keen on training, but we get to the point where we've assigned it to an estimator. We've started looking at the site, at the job. We sent our subcontract inquiries out, and the big question that always comes back to me is, why do contractors leave it to the last minute on everything? And there's a number of reasons, and I think the big reason for me is because unless you're a certain size and you have got all those departments in place, and even then they're pushed for time, you're trying to do too many things at once. You're trying to run the business. You know about this, running the business. You've got a bag full of hats, and each day you wear a different hat, each hour you wear a different hat. It's just pressures of time, but you've got to have a time. I accept that, because otherwise you send a tender out and invariably it's 4 weeks. You might get in 2 months if you're lucky. So having that time period is important, and it focuses us. Pretty much most of the time these days we submit the day before. It's pretty rare now that as a business we've sort of got a handle on it, that we're at the wire. It's due in at 12 o'clock, and I don't know if you know why it's 12 o'clock and Friday, and I'll tell you why. Because back in the day, the architect received all of the tenders, and all the tenderers stood in the room with him, and they all went out for lunch afterwards, and the tenders were opened in front of everybody, and that's how it used to work, and that's why it's midday, because it's lunchtime, or went off for dinner. Or lunch, or whatever.
Well, I never knew that.
No, that's what used to happen. So there's sort of the contractor, a snapshot of what it's like from a contractor once you get to tender. So yes, it is panic. It is panic because it comes in. You've probably got more tenders than you want, or you might not have if you've got it wrong, and you've got a lot of work to do in a short period of time. I've actually started my managerial, if you like, route and journey tendering for a job.
Right.
That was my first sort of foray into. I was a contractor surveyor, or training to be one, but the first office job I had, because I was on site, was actually putting together a really large tender. So I understand it.
Yeah, a subject really well known to you. So.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think we're running close to time. There's so many things I wanted to ask you we haven't covered, so I think that there's the next video.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's covering off all the other questions. But look, what we talked about, some really great stuff there. And we've talked around opportunities in procurement and tendering to foster good worker relationships and collaboration. But then we've also talked around, when you've got a sort of competitive tender, the risks associated with that for the client as much as it is for the contractor. So all of that potentially gives rise to disputes. And unfortunately, the construction industry is known for disputes, and being adversarial at times. And I know you've got quite a lot of experience in this subject. So just, I mean, how, if there's one or two things that we can do through those processes, and even at construction, which we haven't really touched on today, and maybe we will another day, what would your advice be to try to avoid these disputes before they get to the point they get to?
Open and honest. It's as simple as that. The biggest, several areas, but the biggest areas I see are always about extensions of time and programming. And contractors are really bad at shouting, say, I've cocked up, I've messed up, I didn't get my sub orders out in time, I didn't order this material in time, I'm going to run over. We're really bad at it, and there are clauses in the contract that says, I think it's under intermediate form, as soon as it becomes reasonably apparent that the completion date will not be achieved, the contractor shall forthwith, is the terms in the contract, and that actually resonates with me quite a lot. And it needs to be said forthwith that you'll stop. So program is one area. The next area is always about valuations and costs, which is a subject very dear to your heart and my own indeed. It comes down to open honesty. So don't try and stitch the client up. Don't try and be clever. You're paid to do a job. So in my other life, I do a bit of dispute resolution, and I've been on both sides of that. It's not a nice place to be. It involves an awful lot of time from both sides, and it involves a lot of cost as well, because if you've got a full-blown adjudication's great, it's quick fix, it serves a great purpose, but tell your client first what's going on. Write the appropriate letter, tell him what the delay is, what the increased costs are. Open and honest. Open honesty. We are just about to finish a school in Kingston upon Thames. We've got a 2-week extension of time, because the light fittings that the client specified are coming from Denmark, and it's out of our hands. But we've been very open with the client and said, we can't finish, and this is why. And the client's understood that, and we've put in measures in place so that the client can have their building and have temporary lights until the ones from Denmark arrive. But yeah, be open and honest. Don't try and hide. I've referred back to probably one of our first bigger jobs as a contractor, and I sat there in a meeting and said, we're not going to finish on time, and told the architect at the time why, and said, could we have an extension of time at no cost? And that changed the tune of the whole meeting. As soon as I said, I want 4-week extension of time at no cost, the tune the room then went into a different era. I remember the architect turning around to me at the meeting in front of everybody saying, what can we do to help you? And that goes back to what we've been saying in this whole thing about contractor involvement, collaboration, open honesty, respect. And that's always stuck with me, that sort of meeting. And I've always since then been open and honest. If we're going to be late, tell them. And tell them why. And try and do whatever you can to control that. And when you do get into a dispute, try and talk to people. We have the pre-action protocol for construction disputes, as you know. And that advocates early discussion, free passing of information. So don't hide something back from the client. Don't try and be clever. Just be open and honest. It's a whole different route. And it goes back to something I've said earlier in this video about teamwork. It is a team. It shouldn't be them and us. It shouldn't be, architect, QS, engineer, contractor. I know I'm looking at utopia. and utopia is not going to exist, unfortunately. But if you can get that collaboration working and people talking and being open and honest, everyone's got a right to make money. Everybody, the contractor, the client wants to make money from his end product. The architect wants to make money. The PQS, the project manager, the employer's agent, they're all there to make money. So don't keep pulling the rug under them and taking a penny here and a penny there, because it doesn't work. Because if you take it from one hand, he's going to try and get it back in the other, and that's where disputes start to go. It's all, a lot of it is to do with money. So if you don't finish on time, that's programming. That's going to affect you as a contractor, because you've got to spend more prelim costs, more head office costs, etc. You don't want that, because your bottom line's, your margin's going. The client's not got their building on time, and if it's a restaurant or offices, they can't move people in. They've got to keep them in the accommodation room. That's costing them money. The QS and all the architects and everybody else, the project's going on longer, so their costs are going on, because they're on a fixed percentage normally. So no one's going to win. Ultimately, the person who really wins are the lawyers and the dispute resolution people.
Yeah, quite. So in summary, let's just talk, right? Let's
absolutely.
talk to one another,
And
and let's do it early, as soon as we know,
honest.
and be honest. Yeah,
be
absolutely.
honest. Don't try and be clever.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. And we're CIOB members. You're a RICS member as well. RICS, if I want to convert to RICS, I have to do an ethics module, and I am about to contemplate that. CIOB are just going to bring in ethics as part of CPD. It's going to be mandatory to do ethics. And this is what we're talking about here. We're talking about ethics, doing the right thing.
Ethics and professionalism.
Absolutely.
Mike, thank you very much for today.
No, thank you, Joe.
Really great points, great perspective, great insight, and some real value there. So thank you very much.
No, thank you.
So I hope you found value in this video. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us, and we really look forward to hearing from you.